models fueled by light, so they never need a battery, water resistant, timeless, rose gold.
Statements are not evidence. They're just simply designed to assist you in understanding the viewpoints that each side has of the case. Now, you and I have two different roles here in this case. My responsibility as the judge is to see to it that the trial is run fairly and efficiently and on time, and to make sure that decisions are made in accordance with the law with regard to what evidence can be produced or not produced, and to give you instructions on the law as I'm doing at this time. So you have to take the law as I give it to you. Nothing that I say is designed to reflect any opinion I might have about the facts of the case, because that is your job. Your job is to decide the facts. In other words, your job is to decide what happened here. What happened? That's basically what you need to do. And your responsibility in that regard is yours only. I don't get involved in that process. And you're going to have to think about all the evidence and all the testimony and decide what each piece of evidence means and how important you think it is for your decision. And, of course, that is going to involve the process of evaluating which witnesses you believe. And what you decide about the facts in this case is absolutely final. Now, when it comes time for you to decide the case, you're only allowed to consider the evidence that was properly admitted in the case. And as far as I know, evidence in this case is going to consist exclusively of the testimony of the witnesses, as well as any exhibits that are actually admitted into evidence. Now, as I said, your job is to decide what the facts are, and you're going to have to decide in that process which witnesses you believe, how important you think their testimony is. You don't have to believe everything a witness says, or you don't have to reject everything a witness says. You're free to believe everything, or none of it, or parts of it. And in deciding which testimony you believe, you can rely on your common sense and everyday experiences. However, in deciding whether you believe a witness's testimony, you shouldn't base that upon anything related to the witness's race or gender or national origin or anything like that. Now, I cannot give you an algorithm for deciding whether to believe a witness or not. But there are some questions that you might want to pose to yourself as you're evaluating a witness, things you might want to be asking yourself about the witness. Things like, how clearly was the witness able to see or hear the event that they're talking about? How long did they witness the event? Was there anything else that was going on at the same time that might have distracted them from the event? Does the witness seem to have a good memory about what happened? How does the witness look and act while they're testifying? That's why we have them here to testify before you. They're going to be seated right there. You can observe them when they're testifying. Do they seem to be making an honest effort to tell the truth? Or does the witness seem to be evasive and argumentative? Is there anything about a witness's age or maturity that might affect their believability? Does the witness before you is a question and answer process. And so what happens is the lawyers ask the questions, and then the witnesses provide the answers to the questions. And keep in mind that it's only the answers to the questions that are the evidence. The question itself it only gives context or meaning to the answer, but it's the answer that's the evidence. Once in a while, I may ask a question or two if I don't think something's been fully explored. Now, when we go through this question and answer process, there are certain rules that have to be followed. We don't expect you to know those rules, but I'm expected to know those rules, and the attorneys are expected to know those rules. And if an attorney feels that one of those rules is not being followed, it's their responsibility to bring that to my attention, and the way they do that is through an objection. So you may hear at various times in the case an attorney say, I object. And if they do, they're going to tell me why they object, and then I'm going to give the other side an opportunity to present their view on that, and then I have to make a decision based on the law. Now, the process of doing that can take a couple of routes. Most of the time, I'll be able to make a ruling or a decision on that objection momentarily. I've been doing this for about 35 years, so I've got a pretty good idea of how to do this. All right? But, you know, I learn every day, just like I'm sure all of you do. And sometimes something comes up that is a little bit different than I've had to be confronted with before, and I may have to take some time to think about that. And I may want an extensive presentation from one side or the other on what their thoughts are on it. And I can do that a couple of ways. One way is to have just a brief discussion with the attorneys over here. Debate the issue out here in the courtroom. Now, when we do that, we're not doing that to hide something from you. We're really just trying to give you a break, because remember, your job, it doesn't involve deciding what the law is or what evidence is going to be admitted. That's my job. Your job is to decide the facts. So the reason we do that out of your hearing is to just really give you a break from the proceedings, because you're not involved in that. And there's no use you sitting here listening to that, because it doesn't have anything to do with what your job is. So we just give you a break from the proceedings. And when we do have to take that kind of a break, believe me, I'm working as quickly as I can to get a resolution of that issue. We're not out, playing golf, okay? So we'll try to do that as promptly and as efficiently as we can, but I want to make sure I get it right, okay? And it's important to everybody that I do things correctly. And as I say, I realize that I don't know everything, and I have to do a little research sometime to come up with those answers. I'll try to make it as brief as I can, but again, I'm just trying to do my job as efficiently and as correctly as I possibly can. Now, I already gave you some cautionary instructions before we departed on Friday about discussions that you might have while this case is pending. And I just want to refresh your memory. You can't discuss the case with anyone, even among the 14 of you, until this case has been concluded. And all the evidence and all the arguments and all my instructions have been presented to you. So when we take these breaks and you're back in the jury room, you can't be talking about the case. You're going to have plenty of opportunity to talk about the case. Believe me, that day's coming. But it's just going to be when all of the evidence has been presented and all my instructions are presented. And in addition, again, you can't have any discussion with anyone involved in the case, the attorneys, the witnesses, anybody like that, about anything. And then, again, of course, you're not going to be allowed to read or listen to or observe any media accounts of these proceedings. And we've already gone over the reasons for that. I'm not going to go over them again. We've already covered that in detail with you. You're not allowed to do any research of your own. The internet, There's all kinds of material out there, and half of it's nonsense, and that's why we confine our considerations strictly to the evidence that's been presented in the courtroom. Now, as I said, you will be allowed to take notes if you find that helpful. Frankly, I rarely allow a jury to take notes because I think it distracts from your attention to the witnesses. But on the other hand, if it's helpful to you, go ahead. It's no problem. At the end of the day, we'll collect those and secure them for you, and then we'll return them to you when you come back in the morning. The bailiff will take care of that. Now, you can see that we have 14 jurors here, and probably you have this notion that, well, I thought there was only supposed to be 12 on a jury. Well, you are correct. So when we come down to the time to actually deliberate, we will just simply have a random selection of 2 jurors who will not participate in deliberations. And the reason we have 2 extra jurors, frankly, is not to waste anybody's time, but sometimes, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Sometimes an emergency comes up and someone is unable to proceed, and if we don't have 12 jurors, we have to abort the trial. So that's why we have a couple extras, just in case there's some sort of emergency that comes up for someone. Hopefully that won't happen, but that's why we have 14, but only 12 of you will be deliberating. I should tell you that possible penalty should not play any role in your determination in this case. It's my duty as the judge to impose the appropriate penalty, and I have to do that within the limits provided by the legislature, so that shouldn't influence your decision. Now, I may give you some other instructions as the trial unfolds. I can tell you that at the conclusion of all of the evidence and the arguments, I'm going to be giving you some, again, additional instructions that will be rather detailed, and you should take all of those together, the instructions that I give you now, during the trial, and at the conclusion of the trial. That forms the body of law that you're to apply to the facts to arrive at your verdict. So that's what's going to happen. After all the evidence has been presented, all the lawyers have made their arguments, and I have given you your final instructions, you're going to retire, the 12 of you, and deliberate on a verdict. And a verdict, because this is this is a criminal case, if there's going to be a verdict, it must be unanimous, and that means it must be agreed upon by all 12 of you, and it must reflect the individual considered judgment of each juror. Now, I read to you the information several days ago. I thought that was probably back on Friday. And the information is the document that charges the defendant in this case. And there were a couple of charges that I read to you. That one was called open murder and the other one was called kidnapping. Now, open murder encompasses a couple of options, actually 3 options. And that's why it's called open murder. There are 3 types of murder that can be considered in this case. And Mr. Willis has pled not guilty to all the charges in this case. And to prove the charge of open murder, the prosecutor has the burden of proving certain elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, one of the options under open murder is called first-degree murder, and that includes 2 other types of murder called felony murder and premeditated murder. And to prove premeditated murder, there are 3 options under open murder. One of them is premeditated murder. To prove that charge, the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, first, that Mr. Willis caused the death of Jessica Herringer. That is, that Jessica Herringer died as a result of an act of Mr. Willis. Her body need not be recovered if the evidence convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt that she is deceased. The second thing the prosecutor has to prove is that Mr. Willis intended to kill Jessica Herringer. And the third thing he must prove is that the intent to kill was premeditated. By that we mean thought out beforehand. And the fourth thing that he must prove is that the killing was deliberate, which means that the defendant considered the pros and cons of the killing and thought about and chose his actions before he did it. There must have been real and substantial reflection for long enough to give a reasonable person a chance to think twice about the intent to kill. And the law doesn't say how much time is needed. That's for you to decide. if enough time has passed, under the circumstances of the case, and the killing cannot be the result of a sudden impulse without some thought or reflection. Now, that's first-degree premeditated murder. In addition, you may consider, as part of the open murder charge, what is called first-degree felony murder. Now, to prove that charge, the prosecutor must prove beyond a reasonable doubt, first, again, that Mr. Willis caused the death of Jessica Herringa, that is, that Jessica Herringa died as a result of an act of Mr. Willis, that her body, again, need not be recovered if the evidence convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt that she is in fact deceased. Now, second, for felony murder, the prosecutor must prove that the defendant had one of three possible states of mind. Either he intended to kill, or he intended to do great bodily harm to Jessica Herringa, or he knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, knowing that death or such harm would be the likely result of his actions. The third thing for felony murder that the prosecutor must prove is that when Mr. Willis did the act that caused the death of Jessica Herringa, he was committing or attempting to commit or helping someone else commit the crime of kidnapping. And for the crime of kidnapping, the prosecutor must prove beyond a reasonable doubt, first, that Mr. Willis knowingly restrained Jessica Herringa. And when I say restrain, what I mean is to restrict her movements or to confine her so as to interfere with her ability without consent or without legal authority to interfere with her liberty. I said ability, I mean her liberty. Now, the restraint doesn't have to exist for any particular length of time and may be related or incidental to the commission of other criminal acts. Now, the second thing for kidnapping the prosecutor must prove is when the defendant did so, he intended to do one or more of the following: either hold her for ransom or reward, or use her as a shield or a hostage, or engage in sexual penetration or criminal sexual contact with her, or take her outside of the state, or hold her in involuntary servitude. Now, to establish an attempt, the prosecutor must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Willis intended to commit the crime of kidnapping and that he took some action towards committing that crime and failed to complete it. It's not enough to prove that he simply prepared for committing the crime. Things like planning the crime or arranging how it will be committed are just preparations, and they don't qualify as an attempt. In order to qualify as an attempt, the action must go beyond mere preparation to the point where the crime would have been completed if it had not been interrupted by some sort of outside circumstance. And so to qualify for an attempt, the act must clearly and directly be related to the crime of kidnapping, not some other objective. And the defendant must have been either committing or helping someone else commit the crime of kidnapping for this felony murder charge. When we say to help, it means to perform acts or give encouragement before or during the commission of the crime that aids or assists in its commission. At the time of giving the aid or encouragement, the defendant must have intended the commission of kidnapping. Now, you may also consider, under this open murder charge, in addition to first-degree murder and first-degree felony murder, you may also consider the charge of second-degree murder. And to prove that charge, the prosecutor must prove beyond a reasonable doubt, first, that the defendant caused the death of Jessica Herringa. That is, that Jessica Herringa died as a result of an act of Mr. Willis. Again, her body need not be recovered if the evidence convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt that she is in fact deceased. Second, for second-degree murder, the prosecutor must prove that Mr. Willis had one of three states of mind. Either he intended to kill, or he intended to do great bodily harm to her, or he knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, knowing that death or such harm would be the likely result of his actions. Now, that's all the charges for the charge of open murder that you may consider. Again, there is a second count in this case for kidnapping, and I've already given you what the elements of that offense are when I instructed you on first-degree felony murder. Now, it's important for you to keep an open mind here and not make up your mind about any thing in this case until you've heard all of the evidence and all of the arguments and all of the instructions. And I think those are the only things that you probably need to know at this point to be able to sit back and listen to and observe the evidence. And so at this point, I'm going to give Mr. Hilson an opportunity to present to you his closing statement. So, Mr. Hilson, you may proceed.
Opening statement, Judge?
Yes, you may.
Say closing.
I did?
Yes, sir.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. Made me nervous there for just a second. Good morning. Before I begin my comments this morning in my opening statement, I just want to go over some of the commitments we made during the voir dire process. The commitments you made to follow the judge's instructions. You got a taste of it, just a little taste of it here this morning. Also, the commitments on the power of circumstantial evidence, how it relates to direct evidence, and how you can prove a case with circumstantial evidence or a combination of both. And you'll get that instruction when we get to the closing argument stage. Also, the power of other acts evidence, the fact that you can use other acts to help prove certain things like intent, knowledge, how a person does something, common plan, scheme, or system in doing the act. So I want you to keep that on. The fact that you've committed to, if I prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, you're not expecting me to show a body of Jessica Herring. And finally, and most importantly, keeping an open mind throughout this entire case. We talked about during my portion of voir dire, like an open book or like reading a book. You read from chapter 1 all the way to the end until you give your opinion on it. So you've committed to keeping an open mind throughout the entire pendency of this case. Opening statement is what I consider to be kind of a roadmap. It certainly isn't an outline, if you will, of everything that you're going to see and hear in this case, but it does provide at least a basis of some highlights of what I anticipate the evidence that it's going to show in this case. The judge has already kind of gone through what the elements of the charges are, and I'm not going to repeat that, but I will say that the prosecutor's theory in this case is that we are going to be asking you to find Mr. Willis guilty of either felony murder or premeditated murder, as well as the kidnapping charge. April 26, 2013. In this case, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to travel back in time. And the basis of that particular date is important for this reason. Jessica Herringa was a worker at the Exxon gas station. And she went to work that day to work essentially the night shift or the closing shift from about 5 o'clock in the early evening until a little after 11:30 or 11 o'clock that particular night. That particular gas station was not open 24 hours. It was only open until about 11:30. Unfortunately for Jessica, she went to work that day but never returned home. And the crime scene was something of an interest. And we'll get into a little bit more depth here in a second. But I will tell you that at the crime scene, you will hear from officers that will tell you that there were no signs of any struggle, both inside the store and someone outside the store. And what officers were able to find were a couple of watch batteries, a battery cover, and a spot of blood. And so began the investigation of the disappearance of Jessica Herring. This particular case went unsolved for approximately 3 years. And you're going to hear in this particular case how one event, one single event, opened the door not only to this case, but more importantly allowed investigators to really dig in and find out and see the deep, dark, and evil side of Jeffrey Willis. I'm going to fast forward the start of this case, we're going to start from the end and work our way back. April 16th, 2016. You're going to meet a young lady named Madison Nygaard. Back on that date, she was a 16-year-old girl. In the early morning hours, that's a Saturday, in the early morning hours, she was trying to make her way home from a party. She's going to tell you that she'd been out with some friends. She's going to be, I guess, blunt with you and indicate there'd been some drinking going on, there'd been some marijuana smoking going on. The sun had come up, and her ride had kind of bailed on her, and she was trying to make her way home. Now, you're going to learn through the course of this case that she was initially walking west on River Road, and walking in the wrong direction, walking towards the lake. She wanted to go east, and she was going west. Ultimately, she makes her way back west and is heading towards near the North Green Creek Road area, when from behind her a silver van pulls up alongside of her. And she'll tell you that in this silver van was a male individual, the only person in this van, and basically asked if she needed help. And Madison will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that her whole purpose was to find somebody with a phone so she could call her mom. And in fact, she will tell you that she asked the gentleman, "Can I use your phone to call my mom?" And this gentleman said, "Sure. However, you have to get in my car in order to use the phone." And you can imagine, if you can think for just a second, ladies and gentlemen, a 16-year-old girl in this situation, obviously a little upset. She'll tell you about how upset she was and distraught she was. She made the choice of getting into this vehicle, not knowing who this individual was, simply to make a phone call to her mother. Madison will tell you that she provided some direction to this man on where she wanted to go over in the Byes Road area. And she'll tell you that the van started to move, and almost shortly after that, this van takes a left-hand turn onto North Green Creek Road, and Madison will tell you that she realized that this was not the right direction that we needed to go. She immediately asked, "Can I use your cell phone?" And she'll tell you the man said, "My cell phone is dead. It doesn't work." Cell phone gets placed in the netting between the seats. And the next thing Madison will tell you happens is that a gun is pulled and it's pointed right at her. So imagine, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between the driver's seat and the passenger seat in the silver minivan. And this young 16-year-old now faces a gun pointed at her. She obviously will tell you, very scared, not knowing necessarily what to do, asks the man to stop the car. And she did not. All the man did, Madison will tell you, was stare at her. Didn't say a word, just stared at her with the gun pointed at her. She decides, at the young age of 16, that she has to do something to save her life. And she will tell you that she jumps from this moving vehicle, skids across the shoulder of the road, and starts running, as if her life depended on it. She'll tell you that as she's running, she looks back and sees this man now at the end of the minivan with the gun pointed in her direction. And all she can think of, "Don't kill me. I've got a family. Don't kill me." She runs to the first house that she can get to. That house happened to belong to a woman by the name of Dawn Schmidt, who you'll hear from. Miss Schmidt will tell you that she was out on her deck. It was a nice day having coffee when she hears a commotion near her house, sees this young girl running up her driveway, hysterical, in tears, crying, saying, "He's got a gun, he's got a gun, he's got a gun." And immediately Miss Schmidt allows her into her home. She'll talk to you about what she observed as far as her attitude and demeanor was. And Ms. Schmidt does what we all hoped anybody would do. She calls 911. And ladies and gentlemen, you get a chance to hear that 911 call. I want you to pay particular attention and listen carefully, because At some point in time during that 911 call, Madison gets on the telephone. You tell the dispatcher what's going on. I want you to listen to that very carefully. Ultimately, deputies, Muskegon County Sheriff's Department is dispatched to the location on North Green Creek, and Deputy Blackmer is the first responder to arrive, and you'll hear from Deputy Blackmer. He'll tell you and talk to you about his observations of her demeanor, that she was upset, she was crying, she was scared. He'll talk to you about the injuries he observed, on her body, the road rash, if you will, from jumping from a moving vehicle. And he'll also tell you that after getting kind of a general description and idea of where this took place, he drove his patrol car just north of Miss Schmidt's house to the crime scene. And Deputy Blackmer will talk to you about what he saw. Scuff marks along the shoulder showed that it'd been kind of unsettled. Madison Nygaard's shoes, which she ran out of. But more importantly, Deputy Blackmer will tell you that he finds an unfired 22 caliber long rifle CCI brand piece of ammunition. I want you to put that in the back of your memory banks. Well, detectives get involved shortly after. You'll hear from Detective Matt Schultz, who was the detective assigned to this particular investigation. Detective Schultz also interviewed Madison at the hospital. Then also went out to the scene where Deputy Blackburn was, walked it. And Detective Schultz will tell you that not only does he see the scuff marks, and you folks will see the pictures of all that, sees the shoes. They find a broken purple fingernail along Madison. But more importantly, Detective Schultz finds a second unfired 22 caliber long rifle CCI brand cartridge. I want you to put that in the back of your memory banks. Detective Schultz will talk to you about getting kind of a general description of not only the individual who pulled the gun on Madison Nygaard, but also a general description of the van that she got into. And Detective Schultz will talk to you about the process that he went through in order to try and narrow down that particular van. And one of the things Detective Schultz did was he rode the area. He rode that northern part of the area, kind of in a small little radius, looking to see if there were any homes that had security cameras that might have been pointing out to the roadway. Or looking to see whether or not there are any businesses that might have had security cameras. And if you know anything about that northern part of the county, it's pretty rural. There isn't a whole lot but houses and green space. But Detective Schultz will tell you that he made his way to the Sedani blueberry farm and was able to obtain and watch the video camera system that blueberry farm had that kind of pointed out to their parking lot area, but also covered Weber Road. You, ladies and gentlemen, are going to get a chance to see the footage of that video system. It had two cameras, one on the north end, one on the south end. And Detective Schultz will tell you, and you will see, that around 9:20-ish that morning, you see a silver van driving north on Weber Road. 2 or 3 minutes after that van passes through the camera view, you see that same van coming south on Weber Road and turning around in the Blueberry parking lot. You folks get an opportunity to see that video. Detective Schultz will tell you that he used the stills of that video to start seeing if he could narrow down who that individual in that vehicle was. He talked to a local car dealer. He'll tell you he also employed the services of the Secret Service, and through the Secret Service worked with Chrysler. And we're able to take a possibility of 31,000 vehicles, silver minivans, Dodge Caravans, and whittle it down to about 31, given the unique characteristics of this particular van in this video. One of those 31 was the defendant. So based on some other characteristics, Detective Schultz will tell you that he generated what we call a photo lineup. And he included in that photo lineup a picture of the defendant and presented it to Ms. Nygaard and asked her if any one of the individuals in these photographs was the person that picked her up on the side of the road and pointed a gun at her. And both Detective Schultz and Madison Nygaard will tell you, and you will see as marked as an exhibit, the photo lineup. She picked out the defendant, who just so happened, back in March of 2013, had purchased a 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan. As a result of that identification, another important date in the history of these investigations is May 16, 2016. It's on that date, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear from some officers, where the defendant is picked up after his shift from Herman Miller. He's driving the 2006 Dodge Caravan at the time. So that particular van was secured by police. You're going to hear from detectives who performed search warrants at the defendant's residence, 1842 South Sheridan, where the defendant and his now ex-wife used to live. You're going to hear that detectives in their search took and seized a lot of electronic things, computer towers, external hard drives, flash drives. They also searched a detached shed as part of that search warrant, part of the property. And what was interesting that detectives, and they'll tell you, what they found in that particular shed is up in the rafters, tucked, where nobody could see it unless you knew where it was. Detectives found a plastic Ziploc bag. Inside that plastic Ziploc bag, they found some tinfoil. Inside that tinfoil, they found 2 pairs of Victoria's Secret women's underwear. They also find in this shed a camera bag. Inside that camera bag were a couple of items of interest for investigators. One was a micro cassette. That'll be important later. I'll get back to that. The other thing they found was a printed off list of serial killers, including the names of 2 people, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. You're going to hear through the course of this trial that those 2 individuals back in the late 70s were known as the toolbox killers in California. And their modus of operandi, their method of operations, were to abduct women in a van, rape and kill them. You also hear from detectives who, simultaneously as the search of the defendant's home is going on, they are starting to search that 2006 Dodge Caravan. And you'll get a chance to not only see the physical evidence of this, but also some photographs. But they find in a hidden kind of compartment of that van a black toolbox with a padlock on it. And inside that toolbox was a very interesting discovery. Almost like a mini rape kit. You're going to see, detectives will tell you, they find chains, they find rope, handcuffs, vibrators and dildos, a ball gag, gloves, leather restraints, something called a jig. You also see that on the inside cover of this toolbox is a little diagram that contains 2 front view and a back view of a hand-drawn human body with certain shaded areas in locations at the upper part of the body, mid part of the body, and lower part of the body. Injection sites. You're going to learn what that means. That this was a map about when you injected insulin, what's slow-acting, medium-acting, and fast-acting. I want you to put that in your memory brain, because that'll become important here in just a second. You also hear from investigators that they find a small safe. Inside that safe, they find a Walther P-22 handgun. They also find 22 caliber long rifle CCI brand ammunition. And they find some gloves. You also see, and investigators will tell you, that they also find some syringes, one full of liquid, a vial full of liquid, some contacts, and some Viagra pills. You'll see the lab report that the FBI did. The FBI lab analyzed that bottle of liquid and the bottle with inside, or the liquid with inside the syringe, and determined that that was insulin. You also hear, again, as the search of the house is happening, the search of the van is happening, Michigan State Police Computer Crimes Unit is searching the electronic devices that were seized from the defendant's home. This, ladies and gentlemen, is where we find the deeper, darker side to the defendant. Dark web porn. Not the kind of stuff that you go to the convenience store for and you get behind the counter on a magazine rack. Or in certain video stores where you walk in and you go behind the secret wall and there's the porn collection. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about dark web, you have to find it type of porn. Hundreds. You'll hear from specialist Jerry McCarthy. Hundreds of video depicting women being abducted, tortured, raped, and killed. Hundreds. You also hear from Mr. McCarthy that he finds some folders, some subfolders with files related to both Rebecca Bletch and Jessica Harrington. That discovery, along with the .22 caliber gun found in the defendant's van, started leading investigators down the path of two unsolved cases. The first, which you'll hear about, happened on June 29th, 2014. Automobile Road, just south of Riley Thompson, a young woman is found face down in the roadway. And initially was thought to be a hit and run. Deputies respond. You'll hear from Deputy Kennar and Deputy Foster from the Sheriff's Department. And both Deputy Kennar and Deputy Foster will talk about finding the body, later identified as Rebecca Bletch. But curiously, across the roadway from where she was lying, they find in a neat little pile some earbuds, a cell phone athletic case, one of those neoprene athletic cases, and some sunglasses. Deputy Foster will also tell you that in the middle of Automobile Road, he finds a spent shell casing. Deputy Foster will tell you that when the medical examiner investigator is doing her preliminary assessment of Rebecca's body, he's part of that process, and he will tell you, testify to you, that it's during that process they discover that, in fact, Ms. Bletch didn't suffer from a hit-and-run accident, but appeared to have two bullet wounds in the back of her head. You hear from Brian Harris, who at the time, during the pendency of this investigation, was the evidence tech. That during his review of the crime scene on Automobile Road, he finds two additional spent shell casings, very close to where the head of Rebecca Bletch is found. The lab, who analyzed those 3 shell cases, determined that they were 22 caliber, long rifle, CCI brand. You get a chance, if you wish, we'll talk a little bit about the autopsy report that basically shows that Rebecca Bletch had 3 gunshot wounds to the back of her head. You'll see the photographs of the fragments, the bullet fragments that were recovered. And you'll see, and if you wish to read or certainly hear, that the manner of her death was homicide, and the cause of her death was multiple gunshots. And I want to double back to that computer search I talked about and those subfiles. One of those subfiles was labeled VICS, V-I-C-S, shorthand for victim, plural. Within that subfolder, there was a folder labeled with Rebecca Bletch's initials. And, as Mr. McCarthy will tell you, kind of a secret little code that laid out the date of her death, 6/29/14. You'll be told by Mr. McCarthy that within that Rebecca Bletch subfolder there are personal photographs of her, the missing flyers that were up the reward flyers that were up as investigators were attempting to obtain tips as to what happened. So let's talk about that Walther P-22 handgun that the defendant had in his van. It's a 22 caliber handgun. Lieutenant Jeff Crump will tell you that when he received it in the lab, the serial number that identifies guns to gun owners was obliterated. And essentially, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that people do that in hopes that the original gun owner will not be traced. Unfortunately for the defendant, MSP has the ability to not only restore serial numbers, but gun manufacturers also hide serial numbers in different places to avoid this possibility. And Lieutenant Crump will tell you that he was successful to restore that number. He will also tell you where the other serial number is located on that particular handgun. And what's interesting about that discovery is who that gun is registered to. That gun is registered to a woman named Michelle Snotella, who you're going to hear from in this case. And what's interesting about this Snotella and her relationship in this case is that from about 2012 forward, she was a co-worker of the defendant. In fact, they worked the same shift, same area. She worked the line and the defendant was the material handler during that shift. Ms. Snotella will tell you that through the course of their employment together, they would have conversations about the gun she had purchased, what kind it was and whatnot. And you'll also learn that the defendant admitted that, in fact, those conversations did happen. You will learn from her, Ms. Snotella, as well as Gary Foster, owner of Gary's Guns, that Ms. Snotella bought that pistol in 2012. We'll have the paperwork to show you the purchase of that particular gun. What's interesting, though, is that when that gun was sold, it came with a laser sight. And that laser sight was located right underneath the barrel in front of the trigger guard. And don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not familiar with guns and the terms I'm using, we'll have the gun to show you what I'm talking about. But you're going to know before that testimony that when the gun was recovered from the defendant, that laser sight was missing. You're also going to find out through testimony, lab testimony that, and direct testimony that the underwear, remember the underwear found in the rafters of the defendant's shed. Ms. Notella would tell you, those are mine. And DNA, forensic DNA profile will confirm that. You also hear that she doesn't lock her doors when she's at work. She's one of those people that doesn't lock her doors when she goes to work. That, before you draw any conclusions, she and the defendant were in no way, shape, or form romantically involved in any fashion. That he had never been to her house. They didn't socialize at all after the work hours. You're going to hear testimony from the HR folks at Herman Miller, as well as Ms. Notella, that back in March of 2013, there was a week, early part of March, when Ms. Notella was on the clock. She was working her third shift job. And the defendant was off. And that it wasn't unusual for the defendant to ride his snowmobile around her house. And in fact, during this particular time, Ms. Notella will tell you that she recalls seeing snowmobile tracks and actually confronting the defendant as to whether or not he had been by her house, which he confirmed yes. You will learn that that particular 22 that she owned was typically, commonly stored in her bedroom, in the same area where her laundry basket was. Lieutenant Crump will tell you that he did all the forensic ballistic work on the shell casings recovered and the fired rounds recovered at the Rebecca Bleck scene. He also looked at the unfired rounds discovered at the Madison Nygaard scene. And his conclusion, and you'll get a chance to hear him say this as well as see his report, was that the shell casings recovered from the Rebecca Bleck crime scene match or were fired from the P-22 Walther that was recovered from the defendant's van. You will also hear that the fired rounds, the rounds recovered from the head of Rebecca Bleck, match as having been fired from the P-22 Walther taken from the defendant's van. We're also going to hear from, in this particular case, the Michigan State Crime Lab Forensic Division, DNA Division. They'll talk about the extensive work they did in all these investigations, and that they did have the ability, and were able to make some forensic connections between the defendant and the evidence collected, as well as connections between Rebecca Bleck and the evidence collected. You're going to hear them, we're going to walk through a little bit of a science lesson during the course of their testimony. They're going to talk about the principles of DNA. More importantly, they're going to talk about how fragile it is and how it can be easily destroyed either by the environment or the elements or through the use of chemical agents like household bleach. They'll also talk to you about how time, the passage of time, plays a role and can be a detriment to forensic. Because unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, as we were able to match some things to the defendant, some things to Ms. Bleck, we were unable to do so for Jessica Harris. And that's just reality. That's just time. And that's unfortunate. But we do have the defendant's DNA profile found on the trigger and grip of that 22 Walther. We do find the defendant's DNA profile on the inside slide of that P-22 Walther. On a particular pair of Reebok black gloves found in that toolbox. Not only do we find the defendant's profile on the inside, interior of the glove, but we find it on the exterior. And more importantly, we find Rebecca Bleck's DNA profile on the exterior of that kit. I remind you, as I move into this last section of my opening statement, the use of other acts evidence when it comes to showing intent or common scheme and plan in doing an act. So let's go back to April 26, 2013. You're going to hear from Dakota, who is Jessica's, or was Jessica's boyfriend / fiance. That Jessica was a single mother of a son. She had a son, young son at the time. That she loved her son and he meant the world to her. That her employment was in fact working at that Exxon gas station. That on that day, April 26, 2013, during the day they spent time together running errands. And ultimately, around 4:30 that afternoon, Jessica dropped both Dakota and their son off at Dakota's parents' house for dinner, as Jessica had to go to work. And you will learn that through the course of that relationship, they shared a car and they shared a cell phone. So Jessica took the car to go to work. Dakota will also tell you that a couple of times during the course of the night, he checked in with her to see how things were going, actually spoke to her on the phone, once at around 8 o'clock, second time around 10 o'clock. And unfortunately, at 10 o'clock, that was the last time that Dakota had a chance to talk to her. The other important part of this particular sequence of events, ladies and gentlemen, is you're going to hear from two people. Susan Mosley was the last person to see Jessica Herrington alive. She walked into the Exxon gas station about 10:52 that night to purchase a lighter. We'll have the receipt. We'll mark as an exhibit that timestamps and dates things. 10:52 p.m. She purchases that lighter and walks out. The next person to walk into that gas station is a gentleman by the name of Craig Harpster, who was finishing his job at GE, and as he will tell you, does stop at that gas station usually to get gas. And on that particular night, he did. He will tell you that he arrived at the gas station about 11:07. Walked in and noticed there was nobody around. He'll tell you that he kind of scoped it out to see if people were in the back room, break room, and he couldn't find anybody and got concerned. You'll hear his 911 call when he discovers that. So between that time frame, ladies and gentlemen, that little window of time from 10:52 until about 11:07, Jessica goes missing. You're going to hear from two folks, Susan Follett and Eric Barber. Miss Follett actually, at this time, back in 2013, was a day shifter at the Exxon station. She worked during the day. And at the time was married to Eric Barber. And they had decided that particular evening to go out for a motorcycle ride. And both of them will tell you about where they started from their house, eventually made it to Old Grand Haven Road, where they were going north on Old Grand Haven Road to Sternberg, took a right on Sternberg, and started riding their motorcycles past the Center Points Mall, and then ultimately past the Exxon station. And as they're making their way past the Exxon station, Ms. Follett will tell you that she noticed this silver van riding on the service road, kind of parallel to them, and make its way through the pumps to the side of the Exxon station. And Mr. Barber will tell you that as the car made its turn past the pumps, as if it was going to go beyond the station, it turned its lights on. It made its way behind the Exxon station. Ms. Follett will tell you that her antenna went up when she saw that, and both of them, and she made the decision to essentially turn their bikes around and go see what was going on. So they both tell you they went to the Bell Tire, turned around in the parking lot, and made their way back to Sternberg, and ultimately parked in the parking lot of the Center Points Mall so they could see behind the station. And Ms. Follett and Mr. Barber will tell you that that particular vehicle, van they had seen pull behind the station, was still there. Lights were out, and they just watched. And they'll tell you what was interesting is that they saw the back hatch go up. They saw the dome light come up. They saw the hatch come down, but then pop up like something was in the way. And then ultimately get pushed back. They'll tell you that this van then starts up, makes its way back along the service drive, in front of the Center Points Mall, in front of them. Ms. Follett will tell you that she saw that it looked like a male driver driving the vehicle, that there was nobody in the passenger seat, there was no movement in the back. And both Ms. Follett and Mr. Barber got behind this van, followed it to the end of the service drive. The van turns north on Old Grand Haven Road, and they turn south. By the time, they'll tell you, by the time they got home, within minutes of getting home, she's getting a phone call from the owner of the Exxon station saying, we got a problem, we got to come back. Which they did. You're going to hear from the Norton Shores investigators that arrived on scene after the Craig Harpster 911 call. They're going to tell you that when they were in the inside of the store, it looked as though it was being prepared for closing. There was no sign of any violent struggle on the inside of the store. In fact, you're going to hear that they find Jessica's coat hanging in the back room. But more importantly, they find two things. They find the till from the cash register had already been pulled out and put near the safe as if it was being ready to be counted down. Not a single penny missing, full of money. They also find Jessica's purse near her coat. Inside her purse, her wallet, her IDs, her credit cards, $400 in cash. You'll see the photographs that there was one lone service door that led to behind the store. And officers went and investigated behind the store. And as I said in the beginning, they discover 2 watch batteries and that battery cover I talked about. You'll see the photographs. But that battery cover on the inside of that cover talks about it belonging to a Walther sight product, laser sight product. As I mentioned to you, Gary Foster, owner of Gary's Guns, who sold the gun to Michelle Snotella, that P-22 Walther with a laser sight, will tell you that that particular cover, those batteries, would have went to the laser sight that would have been attached to Michelle's P-22 Walther. The blood spot I talked about, you'll hear from the lab, and they determined that it belonged to Jessica Herring, her DNA. You also hear as part of this investigation that investigators followed the route, if you will, on Old Grand Haven Road, and were looking for businesses that might have surveillance video that showed Old Grand Haven Road. You'll hear and see some pictures of a video from a mattress store that's right on the corner. At the time, it was right on the corner of where Center Points Mall was. You'll see photographs of a video from the old homestead, which is along Old Grand Haven Road, continuing to go north. And you'll see photographs from a place called either Coin Zone or Boyer Coin, which is at the northern part of Old Grand Haven Road. All showing pictures of a van. You're going to hear from 2 individuals. Ryan Hehouse, who is the Secret Service agent that not only was helping in the Jessica Herringa investigation, but also was helping in the Rebecca Fletch investigation. And he's going to talk to you about the work that he did in reviewing those videos. You're also going to hear from Lawrence Brooks. Mr. Brooks is a product engineer for Chrysler. He's been doing it for about 31 years. And he's going to talk to you about what he did as far as reviewing the videos from this particular investigation and the determinations he was able to make as far as what that vehicle was, based on his 31 years working for the Chrysler Corporation in the product. And interestingly enough, you're going to be educated on what vehicles patent and why vehicles are unique the way they are. I'd ask that you pay very close attention to that testimony. You're going to find that Mr. Brooks is going to tell you that based on his 31 years of experience, that as he reviewed the Boyer coin video, he will tell you with 100% certainty that is a Dodge Grand Caravan manufactured between the years of 2001 and 2007. Just so happens to fit within the time frame of the 2006 Grand Dodge Caravan that the defendant owned at the time. And the importance of that route is it's a direct route from that Center Points Mall to a house on Bailey. And we're going to get to that in just a second. You're going to hear from a co-worker at the time of the defendant, Clifford Barron. Clifford Barron worked with the defendant, worked the same shift. And on the Sunday after Jessica Herringa went missing, that Sunday, the first day back to work for the defendant, Mr. Barron will tell you that he noticed some peculiar things about the defendant, that he had scratches on his arm, scratches on his face, and a deep wound on his stomach. And he'll tell you, he asked the defendant, and the defendant said he got all these injuries from the scratches on his arm to his thumb to the scratches on his face from working on his brakes. I want you to pay particular attention to Mr. Barron's description of teasing Mr. Willis about taking Jessica Herringa. The defense reaction. You're going to hear the extensive work that a lot of police agencies did in order to try and solve this disappearance of Jessica, led by the North Shores Police Department. And one of the things they're going to talk about is, as you can well imagine, when something like this happens and you start putting up missing posters and reward money, there's a lot of tips that start coming in, both whether they be anonymous tips, silent observer tips, or known tips. And so the police will tell you that they came up with a process of how to not only accept those tips, assign them to investigators to investigate them, but then record what happened in that investigation. And what's interesting is that of several hundred tips, one came in from some folks at Starbucks about a guy named Jeffrey Willis who drove a silver van. It was kind of creepy. You're going to hear from both Corporal Chris Hare and Sergeant Todd Baker, the two North Shores police officers that were assigned to that tip to investigate. That they went to the defendant's house and spoke to him. And they'll tell you that during their conversation with the defendant, he admitted to knowing Jessica and being at the station earlier that night. That he had stayed in the area because he plays this goofy card game called Magic the Gathering. There was some tournament that was going on at one of the shops at the Center Points Mall, that he was in that area until about 9:30. Then he tells officers, both Sergeant Baker and Corporal Hare will say that he told them that he was home with his wife from 9:45 that night to 12:30 a.m. the following night, so the 27th. When both Sergeant Baker and Chris Hare will say, hey, can we talk to your wife? They'll tell you that the defendant said, well, she's unavailable right now. They were not able to talk to his wife. When asked if they could see his cell phone, they were told, well, my wife has my cell phone. It's not available. They will tell you that they looked through and were offered to look through the van, the silver van, Dodge Grand Caravan that the defendant bought. And both Sergeant Baker and Corporal O'Hare will tell you that it looked pretty clean, almost as it had been recent. They'll also tell you that the defendant told them that at 12:30 a.m., early Saturday morning, the defendant said, I got up, left my house, and I drove to my grandfather's house at 3038 Bailey to get a piece of wood for my doghouse. Remember that microcassette I talked about we found in the defendant's shed? I'm going to play that for you. What's interesting about that microcassette is that it's a voicemail message from Corporal O'Hare calling and asking to speak to Shar, the defendant's wife. Shortly after their visit to the defendant's house. You're going to hear from Shar, and she's going to tell you, I don't know what you're talking about. I never got that message. I had no idea that the police were looking to talk to me. You're also going to hear from Sergeant Jim McDonald, who works for the state police, and he's their kind of their phone guru. And he had an opportunity to look at the phone records for both the defendant's landline phone from the house as well as the defendant's cell phone for that particular night. The night that Jessica went missing. And I want you to remember the statement he made to Corporal O'Hare and Sergeant Baker, where he was, 9:45 to 12:30 a.m. Because his cell phone data tells a different story. You're going to see the mapping that and the capabilities that Sergeant McDonald has. And it's going to show that the defendant's cell phone, his cell signal, is bouncing off a cell tower near 3038 Bailey at the times of 11:23 p.m., 11:59 p.m., midnight, and 12:05 a.m. And you're probably asking yourselves, well, how do we know that the defendant isn't home during those times? Because those calls are coming from his house. The home number is calling his cell phone all 4 times. So what's so special about 3038 Bailey? Well, for a long period of time, the defendant's grandfather lived at that residence and passed away in 2011. It was shortly after that that the defendant took over that property. In fact, the police did search 3038 Bailey, and you're going to see photographs of 3 entryways, 3 doorways that were padlocks. Padlocks were put on, and that the key to those padlocks was on the defendant's car key ring. In fact, he admits to putting the locks on the doors. But more importantly, a couple of key discoveries. Investigators find in a garbage can a crumpled up notepad, piece of notebook paper. And on that notebook paper, they find kind of a disturbing discovery. That notebook paper contains what appears to be some sort of checklist. And Detective Sparks, who found that piece of notebook paper, is going to go through that. But some of the highlights on that checklist were reminders to have things like restraints, ball gags, cameras, gas, zip ties, vibrators. We had the Michigan State Police handwriting folks do an analysis on that, and their opinion was that the defendant, in fact, wrote that. You're going to hear from the lieutenant that performed that examination, as well as his report. And in fact, the defendant admits to writing that. The other interesting discovery in the basement of this house is a series, a collection of, if you will, of bleach bottles and detergent with bleach. Several. Empty. want you to really pay attention as the lab folks talk about the power of bleach as it relates to DNA. It's a very important piece of testimony. Now I want to go back to the computer forensic. We talked about that VIX file, victims, plural. Well, not only was there a sub-file of Rebecca Bletch, there also was a sub-file for Jessica Heron. Her initials, JLH, with that little goofy secret code that marked the date of her disappearance, 4/26/13. We're going to unpack that folder for you. You're going to see that. It's a combination of personal photographs of Jessica and her son, Jessica and Dakota, some pornography, missing posters, almost like a little trophy case. As I indicated, you're going to hear from Shar Bishop, who is now the ex-wife of the defendant. And some of the highlights of what I anticipate her to talk about is that she has been a diabetic for a long time. And as a result of being a diabetic, requires insulin. But what's interesting is that her method of receiving that insulin isn't by injecting herself or having somebody inject for her. She has a pump, and she's had that pump since 2005. Just as an aside, you're going to hear from a doctor on the effects of insulin on a non-diabetic person, what it does to someone. With the right area and right dosage, say from somebody who maybe has some experience with that, you can render somebody incapacitated. And defenseless. Char will also tell you that she and the defendant kind of became primary caregivers for Grandpa Han, who lived on Bailey prior to his death for a period of time. That included her doing the grocery shopping and her taking part in cleaning the house. And that's important because she will tell you that in her time walking through that entire house, she never saw a big collection of bleach bottles before. That she never bought any extras, never knew Grandpa Han to have any extras. You're also going to hear the defendant admit to downloading those dark porn, abduction, torture, rape, kill videos I talked about. He did it for an outlet. That was his outlet. That when Detective Schultz testifies, he'll talk a little bit about the interview that he had with the defendant during his investigation of the Nygaard kidnapping. The defendant admits to being evasive in that interview with Detective Schultz. That, as has been indicated, he admitted to going to the Exxon station the day that Jessica Herringa went missing. He was there that night at the Center Points Mall near the Exxon station that night. Admitted to being around Jessica before. This wasn't his first time on April 26, 13. More importantly, when questioned directly, when questioned directly by investigators about whether or not he possessed any handguns, he talked about possessing a Bersa 380, which you'll see, which is true. And when asked by Detective Schultz if he had any other handguns, he said, no, I don't. Knowing full well that he had a Walther P.22 in his van. In fact, later admitted that he lied about that to Detective Schultz. I want you to pay close attention because if you haven't figured out already, there's a lot of interweaving parts to all three of these investigations. And if you use your reason and common sense, ladies and gentlemen, through the course of this trial, you're going to see those connections, and they're not going to be hard to make. As the court indicated, and I will reiterate, that after we finish with the evidence presentation of this case, I will get an opportunity to walk you through it all again in closing argument, where we take a lot of time matching the evidence that you have seen and heard in this case with the elements that I'm required to prove. And even without a body in this case, the evidence will show and prove that Jessica is deceased. Even without a body in this case, the evidence will show and prove that she died at the hands of the defendant. So not only at the end of this case am I going to be asking you to find him guilty of kidnapping her from the Exxon station on April 26, 2013, but I will also be asking you to find him guilty of first-degree murder on one or both of those theories, whether it be felony murder or premeditated. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Helson. And Mr. Johnson, you care to make an opening statement?
I do, Your Honor. All right. Well, I think what we'll do is before we start his opening statement, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll return. Mr. Johnson will make his statement.
I guess, does your knowledge or relationship of Mr. Barber cause you any concern that of your impartiality? I mean, are you going to judge his credibility different because of that?
No, I just recognizing him and previously saying I didn't know the witnesses. I didn't want it to be that I lied.
Oh, fair enough.
Okay.
Mistakes happen. Mistakes happen. Okay, so you still can, regardless of whatever that, and it sounds like it's a pretty distant relationship.
Yeah, it's been a while.
You feel that you can still give both sides a fair trial.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing else.
No, ma'am, I don't have any questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you. You can return the jury back. Does either side have an objection to the juror continuing?
I don't judge.
No, sir. Okay. Would you have to bring?
Wait. Before we just, I want to put one thing just to clean up the record. The court had indicated that it was going to read kind of that modified jury instruction as it relates to first and second degree murder. I just wanted to verify that there was no objection, because we had filed a brief on it, just so that the record's clean.
You have no objection to the elements that I delivered on murder case?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Thank you. You want to bring the jury in then, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will not be anywhere near as long as Mr. Hilson this morning. From what I see of my burden this morning, I'll only be trying the one case and not the three or four that you were described this morning. As far as I know, we're here for the people versus Jeffrey Willis, count one, homicide, open murder, did murder Jessica Lynn Herringa, and count two, kidnapping, did knowingly restrain Jessica Lynn Herringa. And those are the only counts that I'll be trying. All these other materials, that's the prosecutor's burden, and his case, he can do what he wishes, but those are the cases that I'll be focusing on. This is the point where I tell you what I think the evidence is going to show, and quite frankly, it's not going to take very long, because I think when we're done with this case, that you won't know any more about Jessica Herringa's fate than you know right now. You'll know a lot more about her, including that she was living a very tumultuous life. There are a lot of things going on. She's a very young woman. She's working in a gas station. Her significant other is not working. There are financial issues when that happens. She's a mother, and she dearly loves her son. There's not a scintilla of information that indicates otherwise. She's bonded to this child. She loves this child, and with her whole heart. But she's not sure she's doing a good job, and she's not sure that she's placing this child in a good environment. And there are other issues that are going on. You'll be hearing stuff about substance abuse that's going on within her life, within the family confines. The issue of heroin will come up, and you'll be hearing about that. You'll also hear about conflicting loyalties, that while she was with a significant other, there were other individuals with whom she was attracted. And you'll hear from her. She kept a journal. And one of the passages in the journal, which I believe you'll hear, is that at one point she's so frustrated, she writes she wants to get away. She wants to just run away, leave everything, get away, and never come back. Along with that, you'll hear things about conflicting. The witnesses' stories will conflict. One of the things I ask you to is note the physical descriptions. There are going to be witnesses who come in and they will attempt to describe the persons they saw that night. And what you'll hear is they don't remotely correspond to Mr. Willis. Mr. Willis does not have blonde hair. He's not over 6 feet tall. He is not a large man. He is not clean shaven. But you'll hear descriptions of a person that people see at that location with Ms. Herringa that diametrically oppose the descriptions that you can see from where you're sitting. You will hear a lot. You will hear days of testimony about Ms. Bletch. And you will hear days of testimony about Ms. Nygaard. You'll hear about the pornography that my client collected or had possession of. You'll hear about how the type it is and how disgusting it is. You'll hear the subject of his videotaping. He was taping people. You hear about that. But what you won't hear is that no one has ever seen him alone with Ms. Herringa. No one's ever seen him assault Ms. Herringa. No one's ever seen him drug Ms. Herringa. He will be, I believe you will have information that paints him as an evil person, and that may be your judgment ultimately. But you will not have evidence that he killed or kidnapped Ms. Herringa. And we think, in the end, as we remind you of your oath, when you decide this particular matter, is the fact that you don't have anything. There is no there. That you don't have the evidence that you need, whether it's CSI or other sources. You don't have the evidence you need to convict my client of the case for which he's actually been charged this morning. I have no further comments. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, if you'd like to call your first witness, please.
Thank you, Judge. People of the state of Michigan call Madison Nygaard to the stand.
Sorry.
Judge, I'll let the jury know I am going to be using some that, so I know this juror right here may have some hard time. Last time we had her sit over here in the corner. I don't know if you want to take time to make that shuffle. Tom.
Okay. Sir, do you want to move down also?
Yes, sir.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
State your name for the record.
Madison Nygaard.
Good morning, Ms. Nygaard.
Good morning.
Currently, how old are you?
18.
Now, back on April 16th of 2016, how old were you?
16.
And back at that time, who were you living with?
My mother.
Now, I want to back up one day or one night. April 15th, 2016. I think that's a Friday night. Do you recall what your plans were that particular night?
To go to a party.
Now, had you arranged any type of transportation to get you to and from?
No.
All right. Now, the initial party you went to, where was it?
Green Creek.
You say Green Creek, you're talking about the road, or is there a house named Green Creek?
The road.
The road?
Yes.
Now, that particular Friday night, did you consume alcohol?
Yes.
And did you smoke marijuana?
Yes.
Now, were there any other drugs involved?
No.
All right. No other drug besides marijuana?
Nope.
If you can recall, Ms. Nygaard, do you remember what you were wearing that night?
Jeans, striped tank top, and a black pullover.
And this is going to sound like a funny question, but do you recall, if at all, you had, or what color your nails were then?
Purple and white.
All right. And the type of shoes that you had on?
Like slip-ons?
Do you have any socks on?
No.
All right. Now, was there a plan, or did you have a plan on how you were going to get home that particular night?
Yes, my friend Jake was supposed to bring me home.
Your friend who?
Jake.
Jake?
Yes.
And was Jake at this party with you?
Yes.
Now, as it came time, and I don't know, I mean, how long, just so we get kind of a reference, approximately how long did this party go on for?
I can't remember. I was there all night.
You were there all night?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about a couple hours?
No.
Several hours?
Yes.
Now, at some point in time, and I don't know if you made a decision, or was there a decision made that it was time to go?
Yes, I asked to go.
You asked to go?
Yeah.
And you were going back where?
To my house.
All right. Now, your original plan, this Jake fella that was going to take you home, did that pan out?
No.
What happened?
His friend had locked himself in the car with the car keys, and we tried waking him up, and he wouldn't wake up.
Okay. Was there any other method or transportation method that you had?
No.
All right. So what'd you do?
Started walking.
Now, were you familiar at all with the area?
No.
And did you have any other, besides your house, did you have any other relatives that lived in the area?
I knew my friend Jalen lived kind of close by.
Jalen lived close by?
Yes.
And any other relatives? Aunts, uncles, grandmas?
No.
No?
Not that I recall. No.
All right. Now, when you left the house on foot, were you with someone or by yourself?
By myself.
And do you recall at all, Ms. Nygaard, whether or not it was nighttime or daytime?
The sun was coming up.
The sun was coming up?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes? All right. Now, the other important question I have for you, since you admitted to drinking some alcohol and smoking some marijuana, were you drunk at all
Yes.
when you were walking home?
No. I was sober by then.
Were you feeling the effects of marijuana? Were you high?
No.
And as you were walking and the sun is coming up, do you recall what direction you were walking in?
No. I know out of the party I took a right.
You took a right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're walking. You're not sure if. Let me not assume that. Are you aware of whether or not you're going in the right direction to get to your house?
No.
At some point in time, do you come in contact with somebody?
Yes.
Who?
A guy on his bike.
Okay. And what was your question to him?
I asked him if there was like a gas station or something nearby, and he told me I was going the wrong way. Then I asked to call my mother, and when he got on a dial pad, the phone died.
His phone died?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, did he indicate whether you were walking towards something or not?
He told me I was walking towards the lake.
All right. Lake Michigan?
Yes.
So, you attempted to use this person's phone.
Yes.
It went dead.
Yes.
How are you feeling at this point in time?
Irritated, sad, lost.
Okay. What'd you do?
walked back the way I was coming from.
Okay. So you essentially turned around and started walking back
Yes.
in the direction you were walking from. Now, as you're making your way back, are you aware at all of what road you are on?
No.
Okay. What happens next?
Jeffrey Willis pulled up.
Okay. Now, did you know Mr. Willis?
No.
Did you have any idea who he was?
No.
And this is, I guess, described for the jury. Is this, you described the sun was coming up. What's the conditions at this
It was
point?
bright out.
All right. And did Mr. Willis approach you on foot?
No.
How?
In his van.
Now, could you describe with the van, please?
It was silver van.
All right. I want to show you. All right, I'm going to show you what's marked as People's Exhibit number 1. You see that? You see that photo?
Yes.
Does that look like the van that approached you on that early or that morning?
Yes.
Now, when the van approached you, what side was closest to you, the driver's side or the passenger side?
Passenger.
All right. And did this vehicle stop?
Yes.
Now, when the vehicle stopped, what happened?
He rolled down his window and asked me if I needed a lift.
Okay. And were you interested in getting a ride or something else?
To use his phone.
Okay. And what did you ask of the defendant?
If I could use his phone.
And what, if any, was the response back to your question?
Yes, I could use his phone. Just get in.
Get in where?
To his van.
Now, when was there anybody else besides the driver in the vehicle?
No.
Any other human being at all?
No.
How about animals, dogs, or anything?
No.
Now, ultimately, did you? Well, I mean, what did you do?
I got into his van.
All right. You get into the van, and what happens next?
He rolled up the window and locked the door. And I asked him, please roll it back down. I didn't mean to be rude to him. And he rolled it back down. And then I had asked him to use his phone, and he told me his phone was dead.
Okay. I'm going to stop you right there for just a second. Now, did you actually see a cell phone before
Yes.
you got in the car?
Yes.
Where was that?
On the seat, the passenger seat.
Okay. So, as far as you were concerned, there was a cell phone for you to use.
Yes.
And when you got into the car, where did that cell phone go?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Did the driver ever give you a cell phone to use?
No.
At any point in time?
No.
And if I understood your testimony, you were told that it was dead.
Yes.
All right. What happens next?
So I told him to let me out, and he just stared at me and slowed down.
Okay. Now, did you at all indicate where you were going or where you wanted to go?
To my mom's house.
Okay. And did you give kind of a general direction or an address or anything?
No.
All right. Now, as this van is moving, does it turn somewhere?
He took a left.
Okay. And you know what street that was?
Not then.
No. Okay. When that left turn is made, what's going on in your mind?
That's when, as he was turning left, is when he told me his phone was dead, and that's when I told him to stop the car and let me
Okay.
out.
And at any point in time, did the vehicle stop?
No.
I mean, even slow down to a point where you could safely get out?
No.
What happens next?
He's just staring at me, and I'm asking him to please stop, and he goes underneath his seat and pulls the gun out.
Okay. Now, I want to stop you right there for a second. Are you a person that knows a lot about guns?
No.
Could you tell that this was a gun?
Yeah, I thought it was an airsoft gun.
All right. But were you scared?
I was still scared, yeah.
All right. What did you do?
I unlocked the door and jumped out.
At any point in time when the gun was pointed at you, did the van ever stop?
No.
Again, did it ever slow down to a point where you could safely exit it?
No.
What did you feel you had to do?
Run for my life. Get out.
Why?
I thought he was going to hurt me, harm me.
All right. Now, you made mention about, at first, or at least thinking it might be an airsoft gun. Is that still your impression?
No.
Why?
Because there was evidence that he tried shooting me.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
There was evidence that he tried shooting me.
Now, did you see anything else besides the gun itself?
No.
All right. All right, so when you jumped from the vehicle, what happened?
I started running.
All right. Well, let me back you up one step. Before you started running, did you just kind of land on your feet and then start running, or how did that happen?
I, stepped out and then fell on the ground and then got up and ran.
Okay. And as you are running, do you get another look at this individual?
Yes, I turned around and looked at him.
All right. And what's going on when you do that?
He was standing behind his van with his gun aimed at me.
All right. You sure about that?
Yes.
Do you recall, or are you saying anything?
I asked him, please don't shoot me.
Were you worried that that was going to happen?
Yes.
Do you recall at that point in time whether or not you still had your shoes on?
No, I don't. I don't think I did, but... No.
You don't remember whether or not?
I don't remember.
Okay. And do you recall at that point in time whether or not recognizing or seeing that you'd been injured?
No.
All right. Ultimately, where do you run to?
A girl's house. A stranger's house.
Did you know this person?
No.
And what happens when you get to this house?
She was outside and she let me come in. She opened up her door a little bit so I could come in, and I ran in and I told her someone was after me and to call 911.
Okay. And did this woman in fact do that?
Yes.
Now, at some point in time, do you recall actually getting on the phone with dispatch? Talking to the dispatcher?
Yes.
All right. Now, eventually, do the police, or the sheriff's department, I should say, do they come out to your location?
Yes.
And do you recall talking to the deputy?
Yes.
All right. And ultimately, do you recall talking to a detective named Matt Schultz?
Yes.
All right. I want to show you a couple of other exhibits here. This is People's Exhibit number 2. Do you recall this at all?
Yes.
What are we looking at here?
I call it like a little netted basket in the middle console.
All right. And was that present when you were picked up on April 16th, 2016, in this van?
Yes.
Okay. And if you recall, is there any significance as it relates to that? I mean, was there anything necessary or that drew your attention to that netting?
Not really.
Okay.
Not that I remember.
Okay. I want to go through. Ultimately, did you realize that you'd been injured?
Yes.
All right. people's proposed exhibit number 3. What are we looking at in this photograph?
My forearm.
Your forearm?
Yes.
And is that how that injury looked the day that you jumped out of that van?
Yes.
Okay. You want to flip the next one for me? I'll stay here. People's proposed exhibit number 4. What are we looking at in this photograph?
My backside.
Okay. And again, does that represent how your injuries looked on April 16, 2016?
Yes.
Okay. You want to flip the next one for me? People's proposed exhibit number 5. What are we looking at in this photograph?
My shoulder.
And again, does that photograph depict and represent how your injuries looked on April 16, 2016?
Yes.
Flip the next one for me, would you please? People's proposed exhibit 6. What are we looking at in this photograph?
I think that's my backside again.
All right. Is that just from a different angle or different view, or is that a different injury?
The same one.
Same one? Okay. Again, does that represent how your how that looked on April 16, 2016?
Yes.
Finally, people's proposed exhibit number 7, which I think is the same photograph. Now that I look at it. Again, is that your backside again?
Yes.
Okay. Again, representing an injury you received on April 16, 2016?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I think you indicated that you were wearing multiple or multicolored or different, I guess, white and purple nails.
Yes.
People's Exhibit 8, or proposed Exhibit 8, does that look familiar?
Yes. My pinky nail.
Your pinky nail?
Yep.
Okay. And last but not least, you can see in people's proposed Exhibit 9. Anything look familiar in that photograph?
My shoes.
Okay. Now, in your conversations with either Deputy Blackmer or Detective Schultz, did you provide to them a description of, let me finish my question.
Sorry.
A description of the individual who was driving the van?
Yes.
And a description of the van itself as to the best of your ability?
Yes.
Now, at some point in time, you recall, excuse me, you recall Detective Schultz providing you with what we call a photo lineup to look at?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Judge, just so you're aware, for record purposes, I'm going to be marking my exhibits with a number and then putting an H underneath it so that we can designate the trial that was introduced at, the number of the trial that was introduced at.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Ms. Nygaard, I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 119H. Does this photo lineup look familiar to you? Can you page through it, please?
Yes.
Okay, and is that the photo lineup that Detective Schultz provided to you?
Yes.
And under this particular picture right here is, well, I guess, tell me who put your name there?
Me.
You?
Mm-hmm.
So you say yes?
Yes.
So that it's printed and then it looks like a signature as well.
Yes.
And those are your, that's your writing?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And the picture you put your, I guess, printed and signed your name, was that the person that you told Detective Schultz had picked you up and pointed a gun at you?
Correct.
All right. Now, do you see in the courtroom today that individual, the individual that picked you up in that silver van and pointed the gun at you?
Yes.
Could you point him out and describe what he's wearing, please?
Right there, a red tie, I think a blue suit.
And has he got anything
Glasses.
on his face? Glasses? Your Honor, let the record reflect the witnesses identified the defendant. Now, all this incident that you described, did that take place here in Muskegon County?
Yes.
Okay. Give me 1 second here, Matt. Thank you, Judge. I have no further questions.
Good morning, Ms. Nygaard.
Good morning.
Remember me from last trial?
Yes.
Okay. Ask a few more questions, probably the same questions.
Okay.
Okay. You mentioned going to a party that night,
Yes.
and that the party lasted the entire night,
Correct.
and that people were smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol,
Correct.
but there were no other drugs there.
No.
No methamphetamines, no cocaine,
No.
nothing else.
No.
Okay. At least not that you saw.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Okay. But how many people were there at the party? Do you recall? Coming and going?
Probably like 50.
Okay. And can you explain to me what happened to you, the ride you expected to take you home?
Yeah, me and my friend Jake, he had a friend Chaz. We were all hanging out, and Chaz wanted to go take a nap, I guess. And he went into Jake's car and went to bed and locked the car, and he had the car keys with him.
Did anyone try to wake Chaz up?
Yes.
And what happened there?
Me and Jake tried pounding on the windows. He was not waking up.
So you came with Jake. Did you leave with Jake?
I didn't go there with Jake.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
You're fine.
Okay. Do you know how did Jake leave the party?
The cops woke him up the next morning.
Okay. At the party location of the
Yes.
party? Okay. You said there were about 50 people there. Did any of them have cell phones, do you know?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Did you ask any of them to use their phones so that you can call for a ride?
No.
How far did you think you were from home?
I didn't think too far.
Okay. How long was too far? A mile, 2 miles?
Probably thought it was probably 10 minutes away.
Okay. By walking?
Yeah.
Okay. And about what time was it that you decided to go home?
I don't know what time it was.
Was the sun up at that point?
When I started walking, the sun was coming up.
Okay. How long did you walk before Mr. Willis came upon you?
I don't know. Long time.
You had a long time?
Yeah.
Hour? 2 hours?
Probably a few hours. A couple
few
hours.
hours.
Yeah.
Okay. And you never decided to go back to the house and try to use the phone there?
No.
And you said by the time my client found you, you were sober?
Yes.
All right. Do you know how much you'd had to drink the day before?
I don't remember.
You know how much you'd had to smoke?
Don't remember.
Was this something that you were used to, or was this a new experience for you on that occasion?
I have smoked and drank before.
Okay. And you found that you were able to handle yourself under those circumstances?
Yes.
Okay. Did I ask you when was the last time you slept before you met with Mr. Willis?
Probably the night before.
So more than 24 hours?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a reason why you decided to walk alone as opposed to walking with somebody else who was at the party?
They both fell asleep.
But there were more than those two guys there?
No, by the time I was leaving, it was only them there.
It was just the two of them?
Yes.
And it was your choice, rather than to stay with them, to walk on and try to get home by yourself?
Correct.
Now, when Mr. Willis offered you the ride,
Yes.
correct? You mentioned that you got in the car, and as he pulled away, the door and the window locked and rolled up?
Correct.
Okay. Did you see him doing that, or was that something automatic in that car? Is that something the car does when it goes in the drive?
I didn't see him doing it, but
Okay, but it happened?
yes.
Okay. And when you asked him to roll the window back down, he did that?
Yes.
And when you asked him, told him that you wanted to get out, he slowed down. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But before he stopped, he never stopped while you were in the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
But he did stop when you got out of the vehicle.
Yes.
All right. And you mentioned that, in fact, there was a question I couldn't hear. You mentioned that there's evidence that he tried to shoot you. You remember saying that?
Yes.
Was that something that you knew at the time, or was that something you were told later?
Told later.
You were, you remember being asked to describe Mr. Willis, and they did a drawing of him?
Yes.
Did you ever see those drawings?
I haven't saw them. No.
You never saw those drawings?
No.
Okay.
Besides that day.
I'm sorry?
Besides that day.
You
I saw it that day.
Oh, that's what I'm asking.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Did you see the drawings that day?
Yes.
And what did you think of the drawings?
I thought they were good.
Okay. Let me show you something. Defense proposal exhibits A and B. May I approach on it? Ma'am, are either of these I'm showing you those marked proposal exhibits A and B, are either of those the drawings that you saw?
I don't remember what they looked like.
You don't remember what they look like?
Mm-mm.
Could they be
No.
the drawings that were done at the time?
I know this one wasn't.
This one was not.
No.
Which one was that? A?
Yeah, A.
Okay. So drawing A definitely is out.
Yes.
Okay. Could B be a possibility?
Yes, it could be. I have no clue what it looks like. I don't remember.
You don't remember?
No.
That's okay. All right. And let's see. Exhibit 119H, Counsel. This is the exhibit that you talked about with the photo lineup. You remember?
Yes.
And could you point to the one that you picked out as being Mr. Willis? The first one, right on
Yes.
top. All right. Do you notice anything different between the drawing that potentially that proposed Exhibit B and the photograph that you picked out?
No glasses.
I
And
guess I'm going to object, knowing full well when that drawing was made and when that picture was taken. There's a big difference there. And certainly, Your Honor, we're talking about a time period in 2016 versus a time period in 2013. So I don't want the jury to be misled by this testimony.
I don't know what the basis of the objection is, Your Honor.
One, it's misleading.
Well, I think the jury can sort out the difference in time. So I'll overrule the objection. The jury can-
What's the difference in time? How long this was taken? This was done the day of the incident, correct? The drawing B, Exhibit B.
I didn't do it the day of the incident.
When did you do that?
I don't remember. It was
Within a week, 2 weeks?
I don't remember.
Okay. And how long after the incident did you see this photograph?
After I signed this, or
Is there a date on there, Mr. Thankar?
no,
Okay. You remember how
but that's
long?
that's the first time I ever saw this. Is when I signed it.
Okay. How long after the incident was that?
I couldn't tell you. I don't remember.
Okay. Can you give us a guess as to how much time between the time that you made this description and you saw that photograph? Any idea? Weeks,
I couldn't.
months, years?
I know it wasn't that long.
It wasn't that long between them?
Yeah, it wasn't long. Not months.
Not months?
No.
Okay. So weeks perhaps?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Ma'am, do you remember testifying that there was something different about that gun that was pointed at you?
They had like an orange cap on it.
Okay. Is that still your recollection? They had an orange cap
Yes.
on it? you ever hear any gunshots
No.
at night? Mr. Nygaard, thank you very much. I don't even further questions.
Just a couple follow-up, Judge, real quick.
Oh, may I? I'm sorry. Your Honor, I move to admit offense of Exhibit B.
I see it again. Well, Judge, I don't think a proper foundation is laid. This drawing seems to be dated 4/27 of 2013. So that's 3 years before the incident in this backyard. I'd object again as misleading, and it's not, certainly not the drawing that she would have described.
Your Honor, I withdraw the motion at this juncture while I review that.
You done, Fred?
Yes, I
Okay. Ms. Nygaard, would you agree with me that trying to describe somebody and have them draw it, is that easier or actually seeing a photograph of the person?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, what?
It is. It's easier seeing a photograph of
All right. I mean, were you, did you hesitate at all when you saw the individual in the photograph that did this to you?
No.
Was there any doubt in your mind?
No.
All right. I want you to take a look at give me 1 second here. People's Proposed Exhibit 24. You recognize anything in that photograph that you may have saw?
The gun.
And?
Let me point to it up there. The little orange cap right there.
The orange cap?
Yeah.
And I, hey Tom, do we have our little pointer? Or no? Oh, is it? Oh, it's right there. Could you point just on the screen? So when you were describing an orange cap to Mr. Johnson just a minute ago, does that look like
Yes.
the orange cap you saw?
Yes.
Thank you, Judge. I have nothing else.
Oh my God.
Ma'am, did you see an airsoft gun that night or a real gun?
I saw a real gun.
As far as you know.
I thought it was an airsoft gun.
Okay. So now you think it's a real gun because that's what people are telling you?
Because there's evidence that he tried shooting me.
And someone else gave you that evidence, correct?
Yes.
Yes, I got to ask one more question. Sorry. So did you jump out of the car because you thought there was an airsoft gun?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're finished. Thank you, Ms. Nygaard. You can stand down.
Thank you.
All right, this is a good time for us to call it a morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will be in recess until 1:30. Just want to remind you, no discussion about the case with anyone, no discussion with anyone involved in the case, no viewing of any media accounts. See you back here at 1:30. Anything for the record?
No, bring them with you.
Jerry Johnson and
Yeah, bring the notes with you.
did you move for exhibit 119?
I have